Think of a time when you experienced a conversation that left you with a new perspective, or perhaps an inquiry, or you might have felt that something has shifted in you after that conversation. Maybe it helped you gain a new level of clarity, or moved you to take action. That was a coaching conversation. Hello and welcome to the Coaching Conversation. This is your host, Salah Al-Leifi. I am here with Allison Pollard. Allison is a technical director at Improving. She's also a coach, facilitator who work with organizations to promote agile practices to build trust with teams and between the business and technology. Allison, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
This happened, we planned and then it kind of sporadically happened. So I'm glad we were able to make it happen.
Me too, yeah.
So what brought you to coaching? What's the story? How did you get where you are today?
Yeah, I think like a number of us, it was by accident. I had studied computer science in college and had gotten really intrigued by technical communication of actually how do you translate between the technology side and more of that like business or like layperson kind of perspective. And so I had gone into project management after I graduated, learned about Agile, did the Scrum Master, now Agile Coach thing. But what I started to realize, like the technology is cool and I love how quick changes can happen, but it's been the people side that really intrigued me. And so I remember attending Lisa Adkins and Michael Spade's Coaching Agile Teams class. And they had a demonstration of professional coaching. And I sat in awe and thought, I have no idea how to do that. And I really want to learn because it looked very, very powerful. It was actually someone from my client at the time that was doing the demonstration with them. So I got to see them engage someone I was familiar with that I had worked with in a very different way to help them find a different path forward. And I just thought, ooh, sign me up, which I think is easy to kind of commit to in our head. And then we find out how much work is involved. And it's a very long journey.
It's interesting because most of us who have been in that journey can trace back who was the person behind piquing our curiosity. And a lot of times it goes back to Lisa Atkins and Michael Spade and the work that they've done, bringing professional coaching into Agile space.
Yeah, I think that was like the huge like catalyst. And yet, like I also kind of like trace back, like one of the first blogs I had found was Esther Derby. And I loved the things that she was writing about self-organizing teams and how do you work with them. And then similarly, when I had found Agile Retrospectives by, Diana Larson, looking at how do you facilitate things? How do you get a group to like take ownership? And so it's like there's this like longer trail all the way back. I think most of us can trace. So it's like we started having the seed planted earlier, but it wasn't until that like real demonstration of professional coaching that we all went, oh, now I know what it is. Now I have an idea of like where I want to go invest.
I often find that combining the professional coaching skills and some of the agile practices can be really powerful. But like you said, we started to look at technology and then it turns out, well, it's the people. So that's where the focus is on. And that's really where we need to spend more time. So we have a theme in mind around like this idea of intention and impact.
Yeah.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been working in an organization. This is where I always kind of struggle of I'm an external consultant, but I end up functioning like an internal coach because I am coming into the organization, working alongside the teams, working with the managers, working with their various stakeholders. So I really get to know like the whole context. And recently I'd been working with one manager who is like really enthusiastic about like, how can he support his team? How can he help them to transform? Obviously business conditions have changed quite a bit, as you can imagine with the pandemic. So, what does it mean for them to thrive now? And I had realized like, I kind of knew him one-on-one from some other settings. And I thought, wow, he really knows his stuff. He's like really on top of things. He seems like a fantastic manager. And it wasn't until I saw how he interacted with one of his development teams that I went, oh, there's actually some gaps. Like I know he wants to be supportive, and it looks like he's created this like weird codependent kind of relationship between the development team and himself that got me thinking about like, what is the difference between our intentions and the impact that we have as leaders? So that's been a space that I've been exploring, and especially as a coach, like working with that leader of what kind of relationship do I need to have? Because there's got to be pretty high trust for me to be able to name for him that, ooh, it feels like you don't quite have the relationship that you're wanting, and that there's some negative impacts with the group. And there's some stuff you might want to do differently to change that.
And I believe that's where coaching in a professional sense, it may have started in agile or trying to help the team deliver faster or sooner or better quality. And then you hit that like ceiling, or that, okay, you need to work on how the management operate and how they interact with their teams and reports. So you said that you noticed that they say one thing, but then they do something else, right?
Yes.
And so they have the intention. A lot of the managers or leaders, they want to improve things. They want to do things better. But then the way that they convey that can have unintended consequences or a different impact than they hope for.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's funny because I know colleagues of mine that have also worked a bit with this manager and more closely with the team. They might come back and say like, well, he's being really a micromanager, and that's a very bad behavior. Get him to stop micromanaging. And I looked and went, it's not quite that simple. It's not just, hey, stop telling the team what to do. Because what's happening from what I'm observing is he's answering questions and he's starting to provide information before the team has had space to think about it for themselves. And so that was where, being able to come up with like an alternative story, I think, of like what was happening, instead of just like putting it in a very common pattern, enabled me to, say like, hey, here's what I think is happening in a kinder, like more empathetic way, and say, can we just kind of check that out? And I was excited because it was kind of difficult to like hear, oh, I'm not doing so great. But he was able to come back around and say, you know what, I'm willing to try an experiment, and let's frame this. He's like, I want to try not going to some of the team's events, and I'm going to do that for 2 weeks. I'm going to let them know that's what I'm doing, and give them a sense of like why. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, I'm going to check in with them. And it was funny because the team, they had gotten very comfortable with this way of working. So he tells them, hey, I'm not going to come to your meetings for the next 2 weeks. I'm still available. Like if you need me, absolutely reach out to me. But I want to see if y'all can handle some things on your own and give you some more space to do that. And their reaction is like, well, like, we don't have a problem. Like, we're totally cool with you being engaged and involved with us. Like, we don't understand like what's happening. But at the end of the 2 weeks, and he said, so how was it? And they're like, well, like, it was fine. We were always good with you being around. So like, kind of weird that you're not there. And he said, well, did y'all speak up more? And they went, oh, yes.
Yeah.
We had people speaking up that normally didn't. And he's like, okay, then that's worth it. That's what I want for you all. And so being able to have him frame that experiment, like choose the action for himself and kind of set the conditions of how would we know if it's working or not, and know that like I'm there to provide him the support of, yeah, it probably feels uncomfortable, you know, sometimes to like not be as involved, like talk to me about it. Let's kind of like work our way through this. And, you know, we can have a game plan of like where and how you do engage, or like what kinds of questions to ask.
You know, I'm picking up on a theme here, like you mentioned earlier. You help companies and teams build trust, which seems to be like that's one of the triggers, or if there's not enough trust or the trust has been violated in some ways, then the manager is not willing to give space, right? They want to tell people what to do.
Yeah.
So what do you think are ways to build that kind of trust? Like things that you've tried that worked?
So I I know at Improving, we've been following the speed of trust, the Covey work, and really, honing in on there are specific behaviors that you can do to be trustworthy, and that's been a big influence on my thinking and my approach. So, like in this particular case, obviously the team had high trust in their manager. Like he would give them direction and they would follow it, and they were happy with this. The manager had some level of trust of his team and felt good about that relationship. Where the trust breakdown was, in my view, was the team didn't trust itself. And for what we do in technology and how quickly we need to be able to move sometimes, and even thinking about like succession of leadership, like how are people growing? How are they developing? How are they able to contribute more and come up with better solutions? It doesn't happen if a team says, oh, it looks like there's a big town hall meeting at the same time as our next sprint planning. How should we reschedule it? I don't know. Let's ask our manager. And I was like, ooh, yeah, that's something that a team should be able to like figure out on their own. Like that's pretty low stakes of when do we reschedule a meeting to be. That really was like the impetus for me of like something needs to change here. This team needs to feel the empowerment that the manager is wanting to give them. And they just don't realize how much they could be stepping up in this case.
Yeah. I like the distinction you're making between the manager not trusting versus the team or the person not trusting themselves. And it's almost like there's some sort of correlation or a relationship between, as a person, I don't trust myself, so I have to ask for direction or advice. And then if the manager is not cautious or the intention, he's aware of the impact, then he will give them the advice. Right? And then that will continue to just be like this vicious cycle of like, I ask advice, I get advice, and I'm not going to grow because I'm constantly relying on the external advice from the manager or the leader.
Yes. Yeah. And so like in terms of like back to behaviors, right? Like, okay, manager needs to communicate some of the expectations or, some of the outcomes, the kinds of results that he wants to see. And then, the team needs to, start having different conversations amongst themselves, and taking that ownership and like holding accountability with one another. So that's some of the things that we've been working through. I know one of my colleagues, Tim Rayburn, he had this fantastic talk he did years ago about how Lois Lane, if she would just stop walking off buildings, it wouldn't, mean that Superman always has to be the rescuer. Yeah. And so that's sometimes also a thing that's in my head of like, how are we creating rescuers or like, how are we creating victims and how can we shift that relationship? And especially, I think most of us in coaching are familiar with that mindset of like, this person is creative, they are someone that can carve their own path, take ownership, be able to set a new direction and do things in a different way. We don't have to like worry about them being broken and that we're trying to fix them or anything like that.
Yeah, it's the character of like the victim and the hero, or like the person who wants to relieve the victim, and that kind of like they feed off of each other. I recently did some work with the conscious leadership. I learned about the work that they do, and one of the things that I found really fascinating is they talked about like this drama triangle.
Oh, yep, exactly.
Yeah. So that's like the victim, the villain, and the hero, right? They kind of like operate together to like or conspire, whether it's internal for the same person or for different people playing these different characters. So what are some of the questions to help the person, manager, or individual become clear on that there is this gap between what they want, what they intend to do, and what the impact?
Yeah. So part of it was, like my role being able to help reflect some things back of like, hey, I want to check this out with you. This is what I'm observing. And to kind of play off your drama triangle language there, like I need to come into that and not be accusing the manager of being the villain, right? Or using it in such a way that he's going to get defensive, because that's going to break down our ability to work through anything, honestly. Like, okay, now you're in fight or flight mode. I guess I'll wait this out until the brain science is is back to like a normal, more creative kind of space. So being able to, reflect back, here's what I noticed in that last meeting that you had with the team. It looked like this was what was happening. Did you notice that as well? There's also the aspect of giving him more tools of how can he maybe inquire of the team and see, are they following along, or like, what is their intent? What kind of next steps are they imagining based on a conversation that they might have had together, so that he can kind of get some of that feedback from the team. But because he's the manager, he has to like ask questions in a way to like pull it out of them a bit. I think it's so common for any of us, someone's your boss, how open are you to giving them feedback can feel pretty scary at times. So that's where knowing some ways to, phrase it that doesn't make it quite so scary or quite so threatening for the employees.
Yeah. So I'm hearing like what you're helping the person heightening their sense of noticing. Like, paying attention to what's going on, like, what are you noticing, or, what do you really want? And then what's happening? Like, what's the impact of that?
Yes.
I find that, just becoming aware of the intention and impact and the gap between those two things can help the person just recalibrate their come back to like, okay, this was not my intention. So I need to adjust or adapt or come up with something different. So you also mentioned about like, having some sort of feedback, like not just the feedback from you as a coach, but having others provide feedback. So what's some ways that can happen? Because like you said, it can be scary if the environment is not safe, or the team members feel like, okay, well, can I really say what I am thinking? Or,
right.
Or do I need to just be really cautious of the feedback I'm giving? Is there ways to have like set up that in a way that create a safe space for the team members to give feedback?
Yeah. And I'm trying to like think in enough specifics here. So like one of the things that I mentioned earlier, wanting to empower this team. So, the manager tells them, you are empowered. I want you to own the architecture. I want you to own the technical plan, for your product. I don't want you to feel like you have to listen to other roles outside of the team that might have some suggestions for you. Like they're just suggestions. You truly know best because you're in the work on a day-to-day basis. And so the team hears that and goes, okay, so like, how does that sound? Like, that sounds really kind of cool. I'm kind of excited about that. And like, all right, like what problems do you see with it? Or like, how might that be challenging for us as a team? And being able to kind of get a sense of where might there be friction that they feel like they're not able to live into, the manager's vision, that he could then say, all right, so what I'm hearing, it sounds like this one particular group, tries to steer you in a certain direction. How can you as the team talk to them and shift that? Or what kind of air cover might I need to provide as the manager, like as that authoritative leader in the organization, to be able to change that relationship between your two groups? So that's part of it, of like, what did you hear me say? How does that sound to you? Like, what else do you need from me? I think sometimes just with the like, what did you hear me say, is sometimes like very clear of like, oh, wait, you just interpreted that differently than what I meant. So like, let's do a little bit of cleanup on what the message was.
And that plays into this idea of intention versus impact as well, because you hear something, you may not take it as at face value. You're making something up about what's being said. Maybe it wasn't the intention. So it's like there's two things. Like as a person, I'm responsible, as an individual, I'm responsible for, my intention and then my impact. But also like if everyone starts to become responsible for their intention or impact, then we'll constantly not just assume what's being said, what is meant to be said, or what's being heard, but what's meant to be said. So maybe there's something I'm making up about what's being said, but it's not true. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, what you just said there about taking responsibility for our impact, that's huge. That's actually extremely hard. Most of us will have the first inclination of like, but I had good good intentions.
Yeah.
Like I shouldn't need to apologize, or I shouldn't need to be involved in the cleanup of something because I had good intentions. It's not my fault. And I think one of the best descriptions I've heard lately, when we make a mistake, when we do something wrong, we need to apologize, or we need to, clarify and clean up that relationship. And it's the same as if you stepped on someone's toes by accident. You don't just say, well, it wasn't my intention to step on your toes, I was just walking.
Yeah.
You say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I think like that, emotional wake, sometimes the term used of like recognizing like you've had an impact on people. It could be the actions that they took, it could be the way that they felt, but knowing that that's also part of our responsibility of, how did I leave someone, after the end of a conversation, after the end of a meeting, and knowing like I am responsible for that. I own a part of that. And it's part of my obligation as a human being to, keep things in a positive space.
I'm hearing like curiosity about what's going on. It's also like the idea of like trust, because, if something happens and you don't clean it up, or you don't come to a closure, you're saying I'm sorry, or get to completion, reboot or restart, then that lingers and it hurts the trust. So that's another thing, is like, how do you open up if something has been lingering for a while? What are some ways to like open that up so that it can be like, it's almost like I'm imagining like a surgeon like opening something up and like cleaning up the trust that has been.
Right. Yeah. I'm with you. Like there are those moments where I'm like, gosh, I want to be like really like strategic and like hone in on the specific thing. And then there are other times I'm like, this is pretty big and complex and I'm just going to throw it out there. But it's very contextual for me. Like I might have an idea, of, okay, there's something that's not quite right. It feels like there's a lack of trust in this relationship. Is it something that I name directly, or is it something I need to come at a little bit from the side? And that kind of varies from like group to group and how well I know them and how well they know me. And sometimes even just like, how high stakes is this? I remember at one client sitting in the room with the team and their director, and the director's, proposing this like, bold new idea, and the room's super quiet. And he's finally like, what's going on? And one of my coworkers just named it and said, it seems like there's a lack of trust. And the team went, oh yes. And here's why. And I was like, dang, you just named the elephant. And they went, yep, that's an elephant. Let me tell you more about it. It has a really long trunk and really big ears. And, it was a lot easier to work through it at that point because we had put it out there. Other situations, I feel like I might have to bring in some of that lightness. I think one of the skills I've been like really mindful of is normalizing. You're like, oh, it's really normal that we have some conflict between, say, the business side and the IT side. And if we're all like working together and trying really, really hard, some of that friction is good. Some of that's a positive thing. And, what is it that together, is our goal? What's the thing that we're trying to focus on? And how can we look to that as like the problem area that we're trying to like work together to solve, rather than looking at each other and going, you're a problem. Because I can't solve a human on the other side. Yeah.
So looking at each other as colleagues, human beings, not as problems to be fixed, which is also like an element of the coaching stance is like you're not trying to fix them or tell them what to do. So I want to like shift focus here on how to help managers become better coaches, I think, or a manager as a coach. What are some of the ways? I mean, one tool or way is like the intention versus impact. What have you noticed as far as like some other ways that can help managers take a step back and do more, like acquire some more coaching skills that can help them with their teams?
I'm trying to think, because I know I've had a number of managers that would go through training classes. Again, it might have been coaching agile teams, or it might have been some other workshops. I think the key is like, where do they get to practice in that learning environment? And sometimes I'm creating the learning environment for them. I think all of us need that place where we're going to make mistakes when we're first learning to coach. And it's so hard because you're in that conscious incompetence space. Oh, I don't know the question to ask, or I don't know how to phrase this thing, or like, oh, in my gut, I really just want to like tell you what to do.
Right.
That if they're practicing only on like their actual teams, that could be kind of high stakes, potentially, or just kind of messy at times. That, you know, I might want to have like this little like cohort, you know, for managers to like practice on one another, and we might be doing some like book club, you know, readings together as well. Because I have found benefit in let's like work our way through a book. And especially if you're taking it a couple chapters at a time, like what's the thing that you're practicing, you know, between now and like the next time that we meet. And then you get to come back and say, okay, here's what I tried. This part worked. This other time I did a thing, like that was a disaster. And, you know, like, how do I get more of the, this was really good and less of the, this was a disaster?
I know in some companies, the book club or having a book can be a good thing. We did Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, and you mentioned Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. And then also there is this, not just the reading or the learning, but also the practicing and reflecting on what we've done. So if we go back to this idea of manager as a coach, what have been some of like the specific skills that you notice managers are lacking, and some of the skills that they have a strength in, kind of like the dials on a radio, or like a dials, like, you know, you can dial this down a little bit and you need to dial this up a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny. So I remember years ago, there was a group of managers that I had been working with for a pretty long time. And in order to train them up as coaches, I would actually start pairing up with them and saying, okay, you're a manager of certain teams. I want you to come and visit this team that does not report to you. And that was a way for them to be able to like practice their observation skills. So like the two of us could kind of have a dialogue, you know, amongst ourselves. Like, so this team is having a planning meeting. Like, what are you noticing about how they're talking to one another, or who's not talking in the room? What are the things that are being said? What's not being said? Like, what's the vibe, you know, feel like? And it was a lot easier for them to notice and then say what they were thinking, because it wasn't their people and it wasn't their project, you know, that they were concerned about the delivery of. So after that, you know, I think it was a lot easier for us to get into, you know, so based on how that team was working, you know, what are some things that you would think, you know, might need to change? Okay, that sounds cool. Here's another thing that I might have considered you might not have thought of. Let's talk about how would we introduce that to the team. You know, some of them actually stepped up and started like helping to teach classes. So they got more in the trainer space, which is kind of neat. I had others that could help me do more like a deeper diagnostic or like assessment of a team and help them come up with that like improvement plan. You know, like what is this team's like roadmap look like for their learning over the next, you know, say 3 to 6 months or so. So it kind of varied from person to person, but it seemed like the being able to observe more objectively, like what was happening and being in tune with what's the state of the work, what's the state of the relationships, what's the overall like tone of that. Does it feel like it's one cohesive team, or does it feel like it's splintered into like subgroups, you know, and like, what would that mean? Asking questions was a big part of it. Yeah. You can like hear me trailing off of like, and things.
Yeah, no, I mean, there are a lot of different tools, and you're aware of this, like, you know, the individual coaching and team coaching, there is some overlap, but there's also different tools. Like I know, you know, we both part of like this Agile Fluency diagnostics community, and it's maybe that's one tool that could be used to find out what's happening with the team and kind of reflect back. And then I like the idea that you mentioned about pairing with the manager and, you know, having them observe or look at things from an observer stance, since this is not their project, so they may be a little bit neutral or unbiased. So these are really good tools to start with. Are there any resources or places or books that you recommend?
That's a great question. The book that I've been like referring back to recently is Executive Coaching with Backbone and Heart. By Mary Beth O'Neill. And part of what I love is this construct that she has, that the leader's behaviors need to be connected to the team's behaviors or like their employees' behaviors in support of business results. And so as I think about how do you work in an organization, you need all three elements kind of clarified in order for that group to work together cohesively and generate those kinds of, big outcomes that they're striving for.
So you mentioned some of the resources and the references. Are there any other takeaways, things that you would point to for managers to kind of start with or teams to start with?
Yeah, great question. There's the like self-promotion of Agile Arizona is coming up, or I guess this year they've kind of rebranded Agile Era Sofa since it's virtual. And I do have a session there with one of my coworkers about how do you partner up with leaders for the sake of transformation that I'm really excited about. So other coaches that want to learn about this would definitely benefit from attending that. Resources for managers themselves, I'm kind of drawing a blank, honestly. I feel like there's a lot of coaching materials out there, and it hasn't been quite so obvious to me of like, how does it fit in for a manager that does have some responsibilities in the organization that wants to like pick up some coaching skills. So I'm not certain what's on that bookshelf right now.
I've seen some work by the Leadership Circle, or like you said, kind of like picking books, the books that the work of also, I'm a big fan of the work of Brené Brown on vulnerability and shame and things that can get in the way of trust.
Yes. Yeah. I've had a couple leaders go through her latest book, Dare to Lead. And that certainly opened up, I think, different conversations and like a newfound willingness to be vulnerable. That's been exciting to see. I guess it always feels like kind of an act of courage when you take something out of a book and then start trying to apply it yourself.
Yeah. And that's why you need someone like you and me and like coaches who can kind of like pair up with you, maybe ask questions that can get a deeper sense of what's getting in the way. And obviously building trust, like you mentioned earlier, you have to build that sort of rapport in order to have that conversation. Otherwise, like you said, the person might get defensive or feel like they are being attacked, and that impact the trust and the relationship. Is there anything else that you want to share before we wrap up?
Good question. I can't think of anything other than, not only can managers, reach out to coaches and pair up with us for support. I also want to encourage them to check out the community, look on Meetup, especially now with everything being virtual. I think it's a lot easier to plug in to, coaching groups or especially, Agile meetups and be able to find peers and other folks to just kind of talk through, how are they doing it and how might they mentor you or provide you some advice for things that you're trying.
So I know you write a lot of articles and blogs, and is there a place where people can find more about the work that you do?
Yeah, the best place to go is my blog, AllisonPollard.com. That will have a list of my upcoming speaking events, and you can see the latest articles that I've put out there. Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you, Allison. It's been a pleasure talking to you and getting a lot of good insights.
Thank you. This has been fun.
Thank you. Hey, thank you for listening. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about or take action on. Remember, take action and get clarity, then repeat.